There are places where time doesn't move forward, where the past hasn't become history, but simply remains in the dust of roads, in the shadows of ruined walls, in cold houses where voices once rang. Untouched by oblivion, they simply exhaled and froze. Sometimes it seems as if you only need to take a step and hear a door slam somewhere around the corner, a cartwheel creak, the wind carry a snatch of song. But no one will come out to greet you. These towns and villages haven't died. They've simply stopped. The world around us hurries, changes faces, erases traces, builds the new on top of the old. But there are points on the map where everything took a different turn. Here, time refused to obey and turned into fog, sand, rust, and salt, preserving every detail, as if someone wanted us to return someday and see what happens when life stops flowing. These places do not belong to the past. They exist between worlds. Their walls are memory, and their silence is voices no one will ever hear. So on this journey, we will go where time stands still, to cities, villages, and shrines where life once froze and never moved on. In a valley over 2,000 meters above sea level lies Teotihuacan, a place the ancients called where the gods are born. Here, amid dry wind, stone, and light, man once built a city to reach the sky. But once he reached it, the city fell silent, and the silence lasted for over 1,000 years. The Teotihuacan Valley extends northeast of modern Mexico City. From above, it resembles a gigantic plan. The streets form perfect axes, and the buildings are arranged with mathematical precision. The central road, which the late Aztecs would call the Avenue of the Dead, stretches for several kilometers, connecting three major monuments: the Pyramid of the Sun, the Pyramid of the Moon, and the Temple of the Feathered Serpent. All this creates the sense that the city was conceived not by humans, but by forces conceived on a cosmic scale. Archaeologists still don't know who built Teotihuacan. By the time the Aztecs arrived in the 14th century, it was already abandoned and in ruins. They decided the gods themselves had built it and gave it a name, meaning place where the gods are born. But even without the names of its builders, the city speaks for itself. Radiocarbon dating indicates that it arose around the beginning of the 1st century CE and quickly became one of the largest centers of the ancient world, with an estimated population of over 100,000. The Pyramid of the Sun is the city's central point. It stands over 70 meters tall, and its base is almost as tall as the Egyptian Great Pyramid of Giza. Builders used millions of tons of stone and earth, creating a structure resistant to time and earthquakes. Recent research has shown that its base is precisely aligned with the sunset on the summer solstice, and internal tunnels lead to an underground chamber where archaeologists have found traces of mercury and microscopic particles of minerals that reflect light. All of this points to a ritual, possibly astronomical, purpose for the pyramid. The Pyramid of the Moon, located at the northern end of the Avenue of the Dead, faces the mountains. Its upper platform overlooks the entire valley and likely served as a site for ceremonies related to celestial cycles and sacrifices. Numerous burials have been found beneath it. Warriors, priests, and animals, all arranged with impeccable symmetry. These are not mere burials, they are ritual theaters where death became an extension of life, and blood a reminder of the sun's movements. The city itself was planned with unprecedented precision. Canals, residential areas, plazas, everything follows a strict geometric plan. Every line carries symbolic meaning. Some researchers believe that Teotihuacan's layout reproduces a model of the universe. The Pyramid of the Sun is the center of the world, and the Avenue of the Dead is the axis connecting heaven and earth. Even the relationships between the buildings correspond to the movements of the planets, especially Venus, which the Mesoamericans revered as the celestial embodiment of the cycle of life and death. But the most mysterious thing about Teotihuacan is its end. Around the 8th century, the city was deserted. There are almost no traces of war, but there are signs of fires, especially in the temple areas. Researchers speculate that the inhabitants themselves burned their sanctuaries, perhaps to mark the end of an era or a rejection of the old gods. This was not a collapse, but a ritual, an attempt to return time to its beginning. Afterward, the valley remained silent for nearly 1,000 years. Only the wind blew through the ancient streets, raising dust that settled on the stones as a reminder. When the Aztecs discovered these ruins, they didn't rebuild them. They merely added their own legends, believing that the world had begun here. Modern archaeology is continually revealing new layers of this city. Ground-penetrating radar has revealed underground tunnels stretching for tens of meters, filled with glittering particles of pyrite and hematite. When light hits them, the walls sparkle like underground stars. Scientists believe these galleries symbolized a subterranean passage to the afterlife, a path taken by the souls of deceased rulers. Today, Teotihuacan remains a place where the past breathes. At dawn, the sun slowly rises over the Pyramid of the Moon, casting long shadows across the Avenue of the Dead. Tourists walk the same path, once trodden by priests, unaware that each step echoes a thousand-year-old ritual. The stones, warmed by the sun, retain the warmth of centuries, and in this warmth, a strange calm is felt, as if time doesn't move here, but pulsates, returning to itself. Teotihuacan doesn't belong to the past. It exists outside of time, a frozen point in human history, where architecture became prayer and silence became language. Looking at its pyramids, it's impossible not to feel that here man once attempted to speak to eternity, and it responded. If time is frozen in stone in the majestic pyramids of Teotihuacan, then in the heart of the Namibian desert it turns to sand. There, among dunes whose waves move with the slow solemnity of eternity, lies Kolmanskop, a city that didn't die, but dissolved. Its streets now sink into the sand, like a memory gradually fading from the human mind. Every building, every arch and staircase is a trace of the moment when civilization first understood that nature doesn't take by force, it simply waits. Kolmanskop was born suddenly, like a mirage. At the beginning of the 20th century, a German railway worker found a diamond in this area, accidentally picking it up from the sand. The discovery changed everything. Within months, engineers, prospectors, and adventurers flocked here, and from the bare earth arose a city worthy of Europe. Houses with stained glass windows and verandas, a theater, a hospital, a power plant, a school, and even a casino. All of this arose amid the lifeless dunes, as if people were trying to deceive geography itself. The city became a symbol of human confidence that civilization could conquer even the desert. For several decades, Kolmanskop flourished. Diamonds were found right on the surface, and at night, their light reflected in the moonlight, as if the earth itself were aglow with greed. German merchants decorated the villas, and furniture, porcelain, and tools were brought from Europe. Even water, which was non-existent here, was brought by rail from far away to maintain the illusion of stability. But the illusion could not last forever. When the diamond deposits were depleted and new deposits were discovered further south, the flow of people dried up. The town emptied almost instantly. The desert only waited for the moment when the last lights went out in the houses. Sand began to slowly seep in, like water through a crack. First it settled at the thresholds, then climbed the stairs, crept into the rooms, settled on the beds, the piano, the chalkboards. It didn't destroy, it simply filled the void. The houses filled with golden light and silence. Thus began Kolmanskop's transformation into a city where time ceased to be linear. Here, everything happened simultaneously. The wind carries sand, doors open slightly, and it seems as if someone has just passed through the next room. Archaeologists and researchers call Kolmanskop a ghost town, but that's not quite right. Ghosts are things that fade, but Kolmanskop remains. Its buildings stand as they do in photographs, only now their walls are draped in gentle waves of sand. Sometimes a dune rises to roof level, then recedes a few years later, revealing what was hidden. Every year the landscape changes, but the town remains, as if the desert's breath moves it more slowly than human time can detect. Scientists studying the impact of climate on architecture often come here. They say Kolmanskop is a perfect example of nature reclaiming its space. The houses maintain a nearly constant temperature inside, and the sand acts as a filter, protecting the wood and paint from deterioration. Paradoxically, the more the desert takes away, the longer the city lives. Today, Kolmanskop is protected as a historical monument. Tourists can enter a few buildings, but most of the town is closed. The wind is too strong there, and the dunes move faster than people can clear the passages. When you step inside one of the houses, you feel less like a guest and more like an intruder. The silence is so thick that the very air seems to hold memories. Light falls through cracks in the shutters, and dust dances, as if time is learning to breathe. Kolmanskop is more than just a town abandoned by people. It's a living example of how oblivion can be beautiful. The desert didn't destroy it. It transformed it into a work of art, a slow breath of the planet. Here, man and nature have finally found balance. The former created, the latter preserved. While memory disintegrates into grains of sand and light in the deserts of Namibia, in the heart of Europe, it freezes into iron, soot, and silence. Among the soft hills of Limousin lies Oradour-sur-Glane, a place where a single day neither passed nor became history, but remains suspended above streets transformed into a still stream. Here, time does not move forward because its entire supply was exhausted in a few hours, and the earth, saturated with fire, refused to take the next step. On June 10, 1944, when the anticipation of liberation had already permeated the villages and towns of France, a detachment of SS men from the Das Reich Division entered Oradour. The formal pretext was a search for an underground presence, but the reality proved harsher than any formality. Men were herded into squares and barns, women and children locked in a church. Then began the systematic extermination, shootings, arson, and finishing fires where the living remained. By midday, all that remained of Oradour were walls, bones, charcoal, and air in which the smell of burning had permeated the mortar and wood. More than 600 residents perished, hundreds of them children. It was not a neighborhood or a street that vanished, an entire community with its voices, habits, and names. When the occupation ended, the country chose preservation over construction. A new settlement was built nearby, but the old village was left as it had been when the silence had found it. Thus emerged a landscape of memory, created not by architects, but by frozen time. Tram tracks disappear into the grass, bicycles with bent spokes rust along facades, stoves and beds protrude from the charred shells of houses, and store signs are barely legible beneath a layer of rusty crust. Bullets left a pattern on the walls, revealing the trajectory of violence, and every hole became a mark beyond repair. The state has declared the ruins a national memorial, but the purpose of conservation here is unusual, not to restore, but to preserve the destruction in its original form. Restorers strengthen the masonry to prevent it from crumbling, but they don't polish the metal, don't cover up the soot, and don't remove objects from the houses left behind where life ended. Even the ashes mixed with the soil are considered part of the exhibition because they preserve the structure of a day that never ended. For historians, this is a rare example of the material recording of a tragedy on the scale of an entire village. There are no display cases or captions because the space itself becomes the exhibit. Empty window openings, burnt beams, footprints in the hardened mud, the lines of railroad tracks leading to nowhere. For psychologists, this is an embodied collective mourning in which the gesture of silence is transformed into an urban form. A person entering the street unconsciously slows their pace, catches their breath, and averts their gaze from the black walls because any sound seems too loud for the acoustics. Oradour-sur-Glane is valuable not only as a testimony to a crime, but also as an experiment in resisting oblivion. The refusal to restore deprived time of its usual mechanism of smoothing. No new finishes were installed, no fresh plaster was applied, no scars were covered with paint. Instead, grassroots and moss anchored the destruction as a form, making it part of the landscape, where nature does not erase its traces, but rather emphasizes them with soft lines of green. Every year, school children, researchers, and travelers come here to walk the streets transformed into corridors of memory. They see roofless chapel walls, see car bodies growing into the ground, see stoves that will never again warm a home. Above all this hangs the clear Limousin light, neither dazzling nor festive, calm, like the gaze of a witness who no longer argues or persuades. Oradour-sur-Glane is not a museum hall or an ancient ruin. It is an entire human environment, arrested in a moment of violence and preserved as evidence. Here, the past is not relegated. It coexists with the present, and every step on these stones becomes an act of memory. While the grass grows between the rails and the rust quietly deepens its color, this June day of 1944 remains the present time of this place, a time that no longer passes, but has not lost its power. While Europe preserves its memory in ashes and stone, India does it differently, in the living fabric of time. Among the emerald hills of Himachal Pradesh, where mist settles over tea plantations and the air smells of mango and damp clay, lies old Pragpur, a place where the past isn't frozen but continues, as if time flows along a different axis. At first glance, it's a simple village, but take a few steps inside, and you feel as if you've crossed the boundary between centuries. History isn't played out here, it's lived. Every stone, every door, every twist of lane breathes the memory of those who built, loved, and toiled here hundreds of years ago. Praguepur emerged in the 17th century, when wealthy trading families linking Kashmir with Punjab decided to settle in the fertile valley at the foot of the mountains. They built their houses from stone and wood, choosing materials found nearby. The walls were covered with lime plaster, colored with natural pigments, ochre, clay, and plant dyes. Craftsmanship was passed down through generations, and so, even centuries later, no two houses in the village are identical. Narrow alleys are woven like the threads of a carpet, and at their center is a pond called the Tal, the sacred heart of Praguepur. Its water is calm as a mirror, reflecting old temples, granite staircases, and trees planted by the first settlers. The village has remarkably preserved not only its architecture, but also its rhythm of life. There's no rush, no traffic noise, no advertisements or flashy signs. People wake at dawn, open their shutters, and greet the day, just as their ancestors did. Women fetch water from wells with clay jugs, while men repair tools or work in workshops. The sounds here are soft and measured, the clang of brass, the ticking of a hand loom, the distant crowing of a rooster. All of this creates the feeling that time isn't moving forward, but simply circling. At the end of the 20th century, the Indian government designated Old Praguepur as the first historical heritage village. This means its appearance, traditions, and way of life are protected by law. But most importantly, the residents themselves have become the guardians of their world. Elders ensure that no one rebuilds houses with concrete blocks, installs satellite dishes, or destroys wooden balconies and carved shutters. All repairs here are carried out using traditional techniques: no plastic, no cement, only wood, stone, and lime. Even paints are mixed by hand, just as they were a century ago. Archaeologists and ethnographers call Praguepur a living museum, but this definition isn't quite right. Unlike museums, there's no boundary between exhibits and life. People continue to live in centuries-old houses, celebrate ancient rituals, weave fabrics, and make pottery. Every courtyard is a workshop, every street a living history. There's no attempt to recapture the past here, it simply hasn't gone away. Travelers report that in Praguepur, the presence of time is especially acute. It doesn't press or disturb, but seems to live nearby. At midday, when the sun falls on the ochre walls, everything seems filled with a soft gold. Shadows move along the steps, along the railings, along the wrought iron bars, and they seem to carry the breath of past generations. In the evening, when lamps are lit in the houses, the light falls on the stones as if illuminating not the night, but the past itself. Scholars studying Praguepur note a remarkable balance between tradition and life. In other places, the past is guarded by walls, but here it is guarded by habit, simple, everyday, without pomp. Every gesture, every detail reflects respect for what has been. Praguepur demonstrates that preservation is not freezing, but a natural continuation. Time is not an enemy here, but an ally. It lives alongside people, calmly, unhurriedly, like an old neighbor with whom you can sit silently on the threshold and watch the sun set behind the hills. As you enter the central square, you can smell the mingling scents of incense, earth, and wood smoke in the air. Houses with carved arches and windows decorated with stained glass surround you. No one is in a hurry here. It seems as if life itself flows more slowly, like a stream leisurely flowing toward the sea. And perhaps this is the secret of Praguepur. It doesn't fight time, doesn't try to stop it. It simply allows it to linger. Old Praguepur isn't a village of the past, but living proof that time can be wasted if you live in harmony with it. There are no museums here, because the entire village is a museum. There are no tour guides, because every resident is a keeper. And when you stand on the stone steps by the pond, where the water reflects the sunset and the first stars, you understand. Time truly can be kind if you don't rush it. While time breathes softly and calmly in Old Praguepur, in Pripyat it stands still, like the clear air after a thunderstorm, where neither wind nor sound dares to disturb the peace. This city has neither decayed nor aged. It has simply stood still, like a film strip stuck on a single frame. Among the birch trees that once filled the streets where laughter once rang, the concrete skeletons of houses stand, and the windows where lights once shone now reflect only the sky. Here, in the heart of Polesia, in the shadow of abandoned high-rises, time stopped moving that night when man crossed the line of what was permitted. Pripyat was young. Its history spanned less than 2 decades. It was built with the optimism of an era when it seemed that science and labor could conquer everything. The city was erected for the workers of the Chernobyl nuclear power plant, for engineers, power engineers, doctors, and construction workers. It was meant to be a model of the Soviet future, a city where everyone knew their place and believed in the future. Wide avenues, neat neighborhoods, sports fields, schools, clinics, the Prometheus movie theater, and a park with a new Ferris wheel. All of this embodied the belief that progress was irreversible. In the spring of 1986, preparations were underway for the May Day celebrations. Garlands and flags hung in shop windows, parade rehearsals were held at the stadium, and wall newspapers were being designed in schools. People went about their daily lives, buying bread, reading newspapers, strolling along the embankment. Nothing foreshadowed disaster. But on the night of April 25, 26, an explosion occurred at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. An event that changed not only the fate of the city, but also the course of world history. When the reactor of Unit 4 exploded, a glow rose above it, purple, quiet, deceptively beautiful. No one yet knew that this light was deadly. People went out onto their balconies and watched it, unaware of the danger. The radioactive cloud was already rising into the sky, settling on rooftops, trees, and the people standing below. At dawn, the streets looked just as peaceful, but the air was already filled with something invisible, decay particles, an invisible death spreading across the city. The evacuation was announced only 36 hours later. The authorities insisted it was temporary, only for a few days. People packed their belongings, took their documents, and sometimes simply left without locking their doors. Toys, dishes, books, and photographs on the walls, everything that made life possible, were left behind in their apartments. As the convoys of buses departed the city, no one thought they were leaving forever. Today, Pripyat is a museum of time, frozen in the moment of rupture. Paper garlands hang in kindergartens, notebooks in classrooms remain open, their last lines unfinished. Old gowns and instruments lie in the hospital, and everything in the stores remains as it was: cash registers, price tags, signs. In apartments, books lie open to random pages, and it seems as if the owners will return any minute. Even the clock in the town square still marks the exact moment when life stopped. Over the decades, nature has reclaimed what humans once wrested from it. The asphalt has cracked, trees have grown through the concrete, and roots have destroyed stairs and walls. Moss grows on the roofs, moose and wolves roam the streets, and birds nest in the schools. Scientists call this nature's second wind. Here, radiation levels remain high, but flora and fauna have adapted, forming a unique ecosystem. The paradox is that in an area where life should have disappeared, it has flourished. Biologists and ecologists come here to observe how evolution works in an environment devoid of humans. They document rare animal species that have disappeared elsewhere, and they note growing populations of birds and large mammals. In the absence of humans, nature has restored the balance that civilization had upset. And there's a strange justice to this. Where humans failed, life has triumphed. But Pripyat remains more than just a scientific site. It is an emotional wound frozen in concrete. Every street, every entrance bears the imprint of what was and what will never be again. The city is not destroyed, but it is dead without the people for whom it was built. It reminds us of the faith in absolute knowledge, of the desire to control nature, and of the price paid for this desire. From the rooftops, where the wind stirs the birch crowns, a view opens onto the nuclear power plant, now covered by a sarcophagus, a symbol of how man can seal away his own mistakes, but cannot erase their consequences. Here, time no longer moves forward. It does not go backward. It simply stands like radiation, invisible yet palpable. Pripyat is more than just a reminder of a catastrophe. It's a symbol of the 20th century, a city that has become a monument to its era. It doesn't evoke fear, but rather fills it with a silence that echoes the past. And perhaps that's why people continue to come here, to see what eternity looks like when it was born in a single night. If time stood still in Pripyat at the moment of catastrophe, then, in the mountains of California, it fell asleep slowly, like a weary traveler after a long journey. Among the desolate slopes of the Sierra Nevada, at an altitude of over 2,500 meters above sea level, lies the city of Bodie, one of the rarest places on Earth where history is not told, but simply left behind. Here, everything stands as it was on the day the last person closed the door and walked away without looking back. Bodie was born of dust and greed. In the mid-19th century, during the gold rush, a gold placer was discovered in these mountains. News spread quickly, and within months the lifeless valley had transformed into a bustling hive. Hundreds of tents, dozens of mines, dust, noise, fights, songs, and excitement. A town emerged from chaos. By the end of the century, more than 10,000 people lived here. There were hotels, bars, a theater, a newspaper, schools, churches, a cemetery, and even a telegraph linking the town to the outside world. But life in Bodie was not peaceful. It was called the Six Arrows Town because someone died every night. Prospectors mined gold, saloon owners profited, and robbers and gamblers ruled the streets. The wind carried the smell of alcohol and gunpowder. Horses pounded the planks, and torches illuminated faces that always showed weariness. Everything in this town was fleeting, and perhaps that's why it never had time to age. When the deposits were depleted, Bodie began to decline. People left, houses became empty, schools closed, and the bell towers fell silent. By the beginning of the 20th century, only a few dozen residents remained, and soon, no one at all. But the town didn't die. It wasn't destroyed by fire or washed away by time. It simply remained standing, as if its inhabitants had been gone for just a day. Dishes still lay on the tables, clothes in the closets, photographs on the walls. Even the books in the library remained open to the middle of the page. Over time, sand, cold, and sun have dried the wood, but not erased the traces of life. Now the air in Bodie is thick, dry, like the breath of centuries. Light filters through broken windows, illuminating dust that hangs motionless, as if refusing to fall. Each building is a vessel of time, where the scent of oil, wood, and metal can still be smelled. Archaeologists call this state preserved silence. In the 1920s, the state placed Bodie under protective custody, declaring it arrested in a state of decay. This is a rare definition. The city is not being restored, but neither is it being allowed to fall into disrepair. Every house, every street is preserved exactly as it was left. If a roof collapses, it is reinforced from the inside without altering its appearance. If a window is broken, it is covered with glass of the exact same shade. Everything here must remain as is, neither alive nor dead, but frozen. Tourists visiting Bodie walk along wooden boardwalks, hearing only the creaking of their own footsteps. The wind plays in the curtains, as if someone is breathing behind the wall. This sense of presence is so powerful that even scientists who study the psychology of perception call Bodie a place of time echoes. Everything here echoes a moment when man still believed he could conquer nature and then gave up. Explorers find a special beauty in this city. In the absence of life, structure emerges, an order devoid of fuss. Dust settles on furniture like a blanket, and rust transforms metal into a warm, almost living material. The sun rises and sets, but nothing changes. Every morning in Bodie feels like the first, and every morning like the last. The old mines, extending deep into the mountains, are gradually collapsing, and in their darkness lie minecarts, pickaxes, and lanterns. The city, built for wealth, has now become a wealth in itself, cultural, archaeological, and human. Its preservation has become its very purpose. The body is more than just a reminder of the gold rush. It's a monument to the human quest for eternity, which always proves temporary. Here, time has neither conquered nor yielded to man. It has simply fallen asleep, allowing the dust to tell stories instead of words. While time in Bodie fell asleep in the silence of wood and metal, in the depths of Australia, it froze in breathless dust. In the northwest of the continent, among the silent Pilbara ranges, lies Vietnam, a town no longer on maps. Its roads are covered, its houses demolished, and its name has been erased even from state registers. And yet it exists, as a shadow, as a reminder, as the trace of a human breath turned deadly. Vietnam's history began in the mid-20th century. After World War II, Australia needed new sources of industrial wealth, and geologists discovered deposits of blue asbestos, a mineral capable of withstanding heat and time, under Mount Gamersley. Asbestos became a symbol of progress. It was added to concrete, used for insulation, and installed in homes and factories. Hundreds of workers worked in the Wittenoom mines, and a village grew up near the mines. It housed shops, a school, a hospital, and a cinema. Life began to resound among the red hills, bright, difficult, but full of hope. The city flourished for nearly 2 decades. Asbestos was mined, crushed, and transported. Dust settled on everything: clothes, hair, children's toys. No one paid any attention. The whitish fog became part of everyday life. But in the 1960s, alarming reports began to come in. Workers were contracting strange lung diseases. Research showed that tiny asbestos fibers, once ingested, do not dissolve or escape. They remain forever, turning the breath into a poison. In the 1970s, Witten began to close. First the mines, then the schools, hospitals, and homes. People left, but the dust remained. The wind blowing through the gorges lifted it from the ground, spreading invisible death for kilometers. The authorities declared the town a biohazard zone and decided it had to be erased. Since the late 20th century, Witten has officially ceased to exist. The electricity was cut off, the roads were blocked, and the houses were demolished to eliminate the temptation to return. But a few remained. They refused to leave, believing that fear was no reason to lose their homes. These last residents lived alone, surrounded by warning signs, listening to the toxic dust rustling across the rooftops at night. The government tried for a long time to relocate them, but they refused. And it was only at the beginning of the 21st century that the last house in Wittenoom was finally abandoned. This place is now called the Forbidden Valley. From the air, Wittenoom looks like a fragment of a dream, the remains of streets, rusted car frames, and traces of foundations. At the entrance to the valley stands a sign: "No entry, danger to life." But even decades later, researchers record high levels of asbestos dust in the air. Scientists come here in protective suits to study how nature gradually heals the wounds inflicted by man. The most striking thing is that the city doesn't seem dead. There's no sense of ruin, only stillness. Red earth, blue-gray stones, sunlight piercing the void. Everything seems too clean, as if Australia itself had decided to erase not only the city, but also the traces of error. There are no sounds here, not even the birds fly. Only the whisper of the wind, rolling grains of sand, and this sound is like the breathing of those who once worked in the mines. Archaeologists and ecologists call Witten a symbol of human fragility. He didn't perish in war, didn't disappear underwater, didn't erode with time. He was destroyed by the very breath, an invisible silent threat born of progress. And now, when even the map no longer remembers his name, Witten has become a reminder that oblivion can sometimes be an act of mercy. As the sun sets behind the Pilbara Mountains, the sky turns a deep purple. For a moment, shadows from the cliffs fall on the ground, exactly where houses once stood, and it seems as if the city is breathing again. But, with the first gust of wind, dust rises into the air, and the past is gone once more. On the coast of southwestern Turkey, amid olive groves and limestone hills, lies a town tucked away, seemingly in the shadow of its own reflection. Its white walls gleam in the sun, its streets still smell of the sea and herbs, but outside, the windows lies emptiness. Kayakoi, an ancient settlement near Fethiye, has stood in silence for nearly a century. Time hasn't died here, it's simply stopped ticking, like an hourglass turned over and forgotten on a shelf. The history of this town began during Byzantine times, when a Greek settlement called Levisi grew on the slopes of Mount Antigora. For centuries, artisans, sailors, and merchants lived here, creating a unique atmosphere. Cramped stone houses, churches with mosaics, streets descending to the valley. All of this existed in harmony with nature and time, until history intervened in the early 20th century. After World War I, when the Ottoman Empire collapsed, the Greco-Turkish conflict erupted in Asia Minor. In 1923, the Treaty of Lausanne mandated a forced displacement of peoples. Greek Christians from Turkey were sent to Greece, and Muslims from Greece to Turkey. This decision changed the fate of thousands of villages, and Kayakoi was one of them. Its residents, descendants of generations who had lived here for centuries, were forced to abandon their homes. They took with them icons, a few belongings, and the keys to doors that would never open again. When they left, the town remained. No one repopulated it. Muslim settlers preferred the more fertile valleys, and Kayakoi, perched on a mountainside, was abandoned. The wind blowing between the houses became the only inhabitant. Churches collapsed, roofs sank, but the walls stood. Today, Kayakoi boasts over 500 houses, standing in perfect order, as if people had simply vanished, leaving everything in place. Even the stairs leading to nowhere retain the polished stone from human footsteps. Archaeologists call Kayakoi one of the best preserved examples of Anatolian architecture. Each house is built of local limestone, oriented toward the sun to provide coolness in the summer and light in the winter. Inside some buildings, remnants of frescoes, traces of furniture, and fireplaces filled with ashes are still visible. When you step inside, the air smells of salt and thyme. It seems as if you'll hear voices outside the door, but it's only the wind blowing through the stairs. In the 1950s, the authorities attempted to repopulate the town, but the attempt failed. Locals believed Kayakoi was cursed, that it held the longing of those forced to leave. Now, it has become an open-air museum. Tourists climb to the top of the hill to see the gray stones glisten in the sun, but most linger only briefly. There's something about this place that makes you feel silent. Even the birds sing more quietly. Scholars who study cultural memory call Kayakoi an architectural echo. It is neither destroyed nor alive. It simply exists. It has no time in the conventional sense. Day and night are the same here. Only the light changes, gliding across the stone. At sunset, the houses turn pink, and the walls seem to breathe, absorbing the last rays of the sun. Kayakoi stands as a symbol of a world erased not by nature or war, but by a decision written on paper. And yet, despite human neglect, the city remains beautiful. It has become a monument to lost harmony, not destroyed, but simply abandoned. Beneath the merciless sun of the Atacama Desert, where not a blade of grass or flower grows, where the air is drier than ash and the sky seems closer than the earth, lies a ghost town that was once the heart of an entire continent. Its name is Humberstone. Today, this place looks like a set from a dream, but just 100 years ago, it was a bustling industry that fed South America, connecting it with Europe and Asia. There was no gold or silver here, but there was something considered more precious: saltpeter, the white gold of the desert. In the mid-19th century, before the chemical industry developed synthetic fertilizers, Chile became the world's source of nitrogen. Sodium nitrate was mined from the desert and shipped around the world for gunpowder, fertilizer, and factories. And where once there had been only dead land, cities arose. Humberstone, founded in 1892, became the largest of them. Its buildings, schools, hospitals, a theater, a church, and workers' housing, were erected directly on the sand. Tin roofs gleamed amid the desert, children's laughter echoed, and factory chimneys billowed smoke. Life here was dominated by the sun and the clang of iron. Workers began their shifts before dawn and returned when the heat had subsided. People from all over South America flocked to the city: Chileans, Bolivians, Peruvians, and British. The desert seemed to have become a field for human will. Every day, trains carrying barrels of saltpeter passed along the narrow-gauge railway, their carriages clanking in the dry air, the sand burning beneath their wheels. But Humberstone was not only a symbol of labor, but also of suffering. Conditions were harsh. Temperatures rose to 50 degrees Celsius. Dust ate away at the lungs, and water had to be brought in from far away. People lived in barracks, and only the managers had brick houses. Workers went on strike, starved, and then returned to the mines. There was no choice. And yet, the town lived on. Performances were staged in the theater, songs were sung in the school, and festivals were held in the main square. Human perseverance achieved the impossible. It brought life to the desert. Everything changed in the mid-20th century, when chemists learned to produce nitrogen artificially. Synthetic nitrate destroyed the market, and the desert once again took over. Factories shut down, trains stopped running, workers left. Within a few years, Humberstone was deserted. Wind choked the streets, doors closed, wells dried up. The sun, which had once illuminated labor, now illuminated only ruins. Today, Humberstone is an open-air museum. Its streets seem carved from metal and sand. The school still stands, and chalk marks remain on the blackboard. The theater still has its dust-covered seats, and the bar still has its bottles frozen on the shelves. Everything seems to await a viewer who arrived 100 years late for the performance. Even the graffiti on the walls hasn't faded. The paint hasn't peeled because there's almost no moisture here, and the air is as still as glass. Scientists call this phenomenon natural mummification of architecture. There's no rain in the Atacama, so the city doesn't deteriorate. The metal only darkens with age, but doesn't rust. When you enter one of the houses, you feel a strange calm. There's no horror or desolation here, only the steady breathing of the earth. The wind whispers through the cracks in the windows, and the sound is like the sigh of an old machine that still remembers how to work. Humberstone is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. It is protected, not restored, to remain as it is. The desert holds it tenderly in its embrace, like a mother who has finally reclaimed her child. In the evenings, the sun turns the iron into copper, and the city glows as if alive. It seems as if you only have to blink, and somewhere in the distance, a hammer will ring again, a factory will hum, a train whistle will sound, but then darkness falls gently, and the city falls asleep again. Its streets are filled not with darkness, but with peace. This is the peace of labor, the peace of memory, the peace of time that knows it has already done all it can. On the map of northern Alaska, between the cold mountains and the black waters of Cook Strait, there's a spot where there's nothing. No light, no movement, no sound. The village of Port Locke once stood here. Today all that remains are stone foundations, the rotting piles of an old wharf, and the remains of rusty storage tanks. But the air around it still holds a tense tension, as if the place itself remembers how a man once tried to tame it and vanished. Port Locke's history began in the early 20th century. American entrepreneurs opened a fish processing plant here. A village grew up around it, wooden houses, a school, a church, shops, and a wharf. Families came to work despite the harsh conditions. Cold winds, frequent rains, endless winters. Everything in Port Locke depended on the sea. When the catch was good, the village was noisy and cheerful. When the fish were gone, life died down, but it never stopped. Until time stopped here. In the 1940s, strange things began to happen. First, hunters began disappearing from the forest. Then the first bodies were found, mutilated, scattered across ravines. People talked about bears, but the tracks didn't match. Then 2 fishermen disappeared, their boat washed ashore without signs of a struggle. Several families began to leave. The rest held on, until one day the entire village emptied. It happened suddenly. No one knows the exact date. There are no records, no official report. One day Port Locke simply fell silent. Explorers later came to these lands. They found traces of life, as if people had been gone for a moment. Dishes on tables, nets on the dock, unmade beds. The letters and memoirs of those who survived contain words of inexplicable fear. They said that strange footsteps could be heard from the forest at night, as if someone enormous were walking among the trees. They spoke of shadows moving in the dark. But the reality was far more prosaic. A harsh climate, disease, hunger, psychological pressure. All of this could destroy a community faster than any mysticism. Today, archaeologists view Port Locke as an example of the collapse of an isolated settlement. The economy depended on a single industry. Supplies from the mainland were often delayed, and medical care was almost non-existent. When these hardships coincided with a series of deaths, the village collapsed. People fled their homes in haste, taking only the essentials. The last light of day in Port Locke faded sometime in the mid-1950s. Now, only wind-bent spruce trees and low clouds hang over the site. In the evenings, when the fog descends from the mountains, the old buildings become almost invisible. Only the outlines of roofs can be discerned in the milky haze. Researchers who work here in the summer say that Port Locke's silence is unique, not natural, but human-made. It's dense, as if the space doesn't want voices to be heard here again. Nature is slowly reclaiming what belongs to her. Moss covers the boards, birds build nests in the window frames, and the river erodes the banks. Historians occasionally visit the site to take soil samples, measure radiation levels, and examine traces of human activity. They record the growth of new plants and believe that in a few decades, Port Locke will disappear completely, swallowed by the tundra. And yet, its memory remains, not in writing, but in feeling. Here, for the first time, man realized how easily nature can erase his presence, without destruction, without catastrophe, simply with oblivion. After Portlock vanished, leaving behind only an unsettling emptiness and traces of human breath, time's gaze seemed to turn eastward, to where the ocean conceals other cities. Off the coast of Japan stands an island that hasn't sunk into darkness, but has become a monolith of memory. Its walls still stand, as if trying to hold on to an era that has sunk beneath the waves. This is Hashima, a tiny patch of land surrounded by the sea, where concrete has become the flesh of the past. Hashima Island is located near Nagasaki, just 20 kilometers from the coast, yet it seems separated from the world not by distance but by time. Today it looks like a gray ship frozen at sea, but back in the 19th century, life was thriving here. It all began when Japanese engineers discovered coal deposits beneath the seafloor, the fuel that became the heart of the Industrial Revolution. Mitsubishi bought the island and built mines extending hundreds of meters beneath the ocean. Thus began a new chapter in Japanese history, where man, for the first time, dared to carve a city directly from the sea. Life on the island developed rapidly. By the early 20th century, Hashima had become a miniature metropolis. Concrete houses, schools, shops, temples, and hospitals sprang up on a few hectares of land. There were no trees, soil, or gardens, only stone, steel, and iron. But people lived, married, raised children, and worked 12-hour shifts underground. In the morning, miners descended into sweltering tunnels where temperatures soared above 40 degrees Celsius, and the air was thick with coal dust. In the evening, they returned to cramped apartments, where every wall divided space between dozens of families. Despite the harsh conditions, Hashima lived like a living organism. Laughter echoed in the school, laundry hung out to dry on the rooftops, and small shops sold rice and vegetables delivered by sea. Festivals took place in the square, and the tiny cinemas showed new Japanese films. People learned to ignore the sound of the sea, which surrounded them on all sides. It became part of everyday life, like breathing. But the island also had a dark side. During World War II, prisoners and POWs from Korea and China were used here. They toiled underground in unbearable conditions, and many never returned. This chapter of history was long hushed up, but its memory remains within the walls, in the mines, in a silence that resonates louder than any testimony. By the mid-20th century, coal began to give way to oil. The once thriving island began to lose its purpose. The mines closed one after another, and soon Hashima was deserted. In 1974, Mitsubishi announced a complete halt to mining and evacuated all residents. Over the course of several weeks, ships evacuated 5,000 people. They left everything behind: furniture, toys, photographs, dishes. Even the radios were left on. Since then, the island has stood as if carved out of another world. The wind whistles through the broken windows. Sea salt corrodes the concrete, but the buildings remain standing. Hashima's concrete has proven resilient to time. Everything here remains frozen as it was on the city's last day. Chalk marks are still visible on the blackboards in the classrooms, dishes still remain on the shelves in the apartments, and rusty bicycles, long since fused with dust, lie on the stairs. Scientists call Hashima modern archaeology. Unlike ancient ruins, it doesn't sink into the sand, but stands as it was when it was abandoned. It's a museum of the human experience, not restored or protected from time, but simply abandoned in its hands. The sun rises over the gray walls and sets below the horizon without the slightest change. Everything here exists in balance, neither life, nor death, nor movement. Hashima is listed as a UNESCO World Heritage Site, but access is limited to a narrow route, open to rare tours. Tourists walk through crumbling galleries where the silence is thicker than the air. It's not oppressive, but rather almost captivating. Every step echoes like a bygone century. Even the sea around seems calmer, as if unwilling to disturb the concrete tranquility. This island symbolizes how man once decided to subjugate nature and build a future in a place uninhabitable. But when the need disappeared, the future froze along with him. Hashima became a reminder of the fragility of civilization, of how easily progress becomes memory. Here, everything human has disappeared, but order, silence, and gray stone remain, seemingly frozen in the breath of time. Hashima needs no protection. The sea itself, cold, dispassionate, eternal, keeps it safe. It polishes the concrete and returns the island to its original essence, to be part of the elements, not of man. After Hashima, where concrete merged with the sea, time seemed to turn toward the cold, to a place where memory doesn't burn, but freezes. Among the snowy valleys of the Svalbard archipelago, beyond the Arctic Circle, lies a place where the past hasn't crumbled but is preserved, like a fly in amber. Here, the wind sweeps away traces but leaves the essence untouched. This is Pyramiden, the northernmost city built by the Soviet Union, and one of those places where history doesn't die because the cold prevents it from decomposing. The pyramid arose in the 1930s when Soviet geologists discovered coal on Spitsbergen. On these harsh islands, mining seemed impossible. Permafrost, 9 months of darkness, temperatures dropping to 40 degrees below zero. But this very fact became a challenge. The Soviet government decided to build here not just a mine, but a model city. A symbol of human perseverance and ideological superiority. A city of the future on the edge of the world. Construction lasted for decades. The first houses appeared in the late 1940s, followed by a school, a club, a greenhouse, a gym, and a library. Everything was laid out in a strict order, with straight streets and architecture reminiscent of the finest examples of Stalinist empire style. In the central square stood a monument to Lenin, the northernmost monument on the planet. Its face still faces the mountain that gave the city its name. Behind it stands the Palace of Culture, with its stained glass windows, residential areas, a kindergarten, and a greenhouse where tomatoes, cucumbers, and flowers were grown under lamps. Life in Pyramiden was measured. The best specialists, engineers, miners, and their families were sent here. They were well paid, and supplies were uninterrupted. Fresh food, books, even musical instruments were delivered from the mainland. The mines worked, people went to the movies in the evenings, and children sledded between the houses. In winter, the aurora borealis hung over the city. In summer, the sun never set. Everything here existed as if in a closed system, perfectly planned, self-sufficient, frozen in its own rhythm. But behind the ideal facade, fatigue always lurked. The isolation was oppressive, the polar night was maddening, and working in the mines was deadly. The ground beneath Pyramiden was unforgiving. One wrong move, and an avalanche of coal could engulf an entire team. People died, but their names weren't written in the newspapers. The city had to remain a showcase. In the 1990s, when the Soviet Union collapsed, funding dried up. In 1998, the last batch of coal was brought to the surface. People loaded their suitcases onto ships and left, leaving everything behind. The piano in the club, the books on the shelves, the paintings on the walls, the skates in the lockers. Even the milk bottles remained in the refrigerators. No one destroyed or looted. The cold had made the place inviolable. Now the pyramid stands like a city of illusion. The wind whistles between the panel buildings. The flags fade but don't fall. Snow lies on the stairs, never melting. Everything seems alive, as if people are simply sleeping. When you enter the house, you hear your own breathing, and it seems as if someone is listening in return. In the greenhouse, pots of dried soil still remain. In the club hall, posters yellowed with time. Even the scoreboard on the sports field still shows zeros, as if the game hasn't even started yet. Scientists call Pyramiden a museum of frozen socialism. Nothing changes here because the climate doesn't allow it. The permafrost even traps odors. The air smells of coal and iron, just like the time when life was thriving underground. For historians, this city has become a living archive of the 20th century, where everything has been preserved in its original form. Costumes, tools, documents, scraps of newspapers. Every detail speaks louder than words. When the sun rises over the fjord in summer, the light reflects off the windows of the houses, and the city seems alive. But take a step, and the silence becomes absolute. Only the wind blows through the streets as if reading an invisible book. The pyramid no longer belongs to man. It belongs to time, which here does not move, but stands still, like ice. Perhaps no place on Earth demonstrates so clearly that memory doesn't always die. Sometimes it simply waits. After the polar silence of Pyramiden, where the cold guards memory, the world seems to open a new page, where time is hidden not in ice, but in metal. On the shores of Lake Constance, amid gentle slopes and a clear sky, stands a gigantic structure, resembling a cathedral dedicated not to faith, but to invention. This is the Zeppelin hangar, a vault of steel and light, beneath which humanity first attempted to tame the sky. Friedrichshafen at the beginning of the 20th century was a city of visionary engineers. It was here that a concept was born that would change the notion of air as a void. Count Ferdinand von Zeppelin, a man of military bearing and almost religious obstinacy, believed it was possible to build a controlled airship capable of crossing oceans. This required a place where one could assemble not just a machine, but an entire world of metal and hydrogen. Thus, a hangar arose on the lakeshore, a structure the likes of which Europe had never seen before. Its length exceeded 200 meters, its height equaled that of a 9-story building, and its gates were so enormous that, when opened, they created their own wind. Riveting hammers thundered beneath its vaults day and night. Thousands of components were joined into perfect arcs, each truss becoming part of the skeleton of the flying giant. Legends were born here: Zeppelin LZ, Graf Zeppelin, Hindenburg. These names resounded like titles of an era that believed technology could conquer distance. The first flights drew crowds of spectators. The airships rose slowly, majestically, as if they were living beings rather than machines. They crossed the Alps, the seas, even the Atlantic, turning travel into a celestial ritual. In the 1930s, the hangar in Friedrichshafen became a symbol of progress. Its metal dome reflected the dawn and shone in the spotlights at night. Inside, beneath the arches, the smell of oil and hot aluminum filled the air. Each new airship seemed like a step toward a future where the sky would be as precious as the earth, but a shadow was already lurking in this aspiration. When the Hindenburg caught fire in Lakehurst, USA, in May 1937, everything changed. The world, watching the flames on newsreels, lost faith in the giants of the air. After the disaster, the hangars were abandoned. Some were converted into warehouses, others into military workshops. During World War II, they became targets for bombers, but miraculously the main hangar, the one on the shore of Lake Constance, survived. Its metal trusses survived shelling, icing, reconstruction, and oblivion. Only decades later, when the airships had become a memory, did people return to the hangar, not engineers, but caretakers. Today, it's one of Germany's most impressive structures. Inside, a museum displays restored engines, maps of the first routes, and photographs of airships soaring over cities like miniature models. A huge hall houses an exact replica of the gondola in which passengers traveled: wooden seats, brass instruments, windows offering views of the clouds. The air here still smells of time, a mixture of dust, oil, and a thin layer of ozone, like a memory of past flights. Architects and historians call the Zeppelin hangar a technological cathedral. Its construction is astounding. Not a single weld, only thousands of riveted joints, calculated by hand. The metal within it doesn't age, doesn't crack, and doesn't lose its elasticity. There's something symbolic about this. Iron has proven more durable than human ideals. It has outlived wars, political systems, and the very belief in technology as the path to salvation. Standing under the dome, it's difficult to separate the present from the past. Rays of light streaming through the windows fall on rivets and curved trusses, and everything seems to breathe, not with air, but with memory. In this silence, one can hear the hum of old engines, the echoes of engineers' footsteps, the creaking of wheels that once marked the beginning of flight. Here, time hasn't disappeared, but merely slowed down so that the metal can hold it. The Zeppelin hangar is more than just a monument to engineering. It's a place where man left a mark on his desire to rise higher than was permitted. Its vaults remind us that the dream of the sky may burn, but it never dies. The metal is cold, but it still resonates with the warmth of human audacity. And as long as even one person stands beneath this dome, looking upward, the world will never completely forget how people once tried to build eternity from steel and wind. After the cold hangars of Germany, where metal retains the breath of the past, time seems to leap toward the sun, to a place where the sea still smells, but life has long since vanished. On the southeastern coast of Cyprus, amid golden beaches and faded palm trees, stands a city frozen forever in the mid-20th century. Varosha is a place where summer lasts forever, but no one can sense it. Varosha was the heart of Cypriot tourism. In the 1960s, it became a symbol of the new Mediterranean, modern, wealthy, and bustling. Hotels, restaurants, and marinas were built here. Hollywood stars, European royalty, photographers, and journalists flocked here. with its snow-white facades, palm trees lining the waterfront, shop windows displaying French fashion, the scent of coffee and sunshine, the city lived in the rhythm of a never-ending holiday. It was a golden age for Cyprus, a time when it seemed history could no longer intervene. But in 1974, everything came to an end. Following a military coup, Turkish troops landed on the island, and within days, Varosha found itself in a war zone. People left in a hurry, abandoning suitcases, documents, dishes, and photographs. No one believed they were leaving forever. The city emptied, and soon fences appeared around it, and barbed wire along the beaches. Since then, Varosha has been closed. For over half a century, its streets have belonged only to the wind, sand, and sun. When the war ended, the border divided the island, and Varosha remained in the zone controlled by Turkish troops. The authorities declared the area a military facility, banning even civilians from entering. Since then, the city has lived in its own time. The building facades are faded, but they stand. The windows are broken, but not destroyed. Mannequins dressed in 1970s clothing still hang inside stores, and cars with license plates from that era still hang in garages. Sand slowly engulfs the streets, trees grow through the walls, but the fabric of the city remains. Researchers call Varosha a museum of slow decay. Here, time doesn't move linearly, but seems to spin in place. Everything in this space evokes life, yet nothing lives. Even the sea lapping the shore seems motionless. Looking at the city from the outside, it's hard to believe that lights once shone behind every window, and that thousands of people once walked these streets. Journalists who managed to enter Varosha under military escort describe a strange feeling, as if the city were awaiting the return of its owners. There are sheets on the hotel beds, cutlery in the restaurants, and dusty microphones on the stages. Everything seems ready for the beginning of a day that will never come. Birds fly into empty apartments, cats stroll across the rooftops, but man has vanished, leaving behind the perfect order of oblivion. For Cyprus, Varosha has become a symbol of a lost paradise. Politicians debate its future, some talk of returning it, others of preserving it as a historical monument. But perhaps silence is its only chance to remain authentic. Restore these streets, reopen the hotels, and the very magic of a place where the past is not simply preserved, but frozen, like a frame of old film, will vanish. Today, the same azure horizon still hovers over Varosha. The sun illuminates the faded facades, the sea glistens in the broken windows, and the wind plays with the curtains in rooms no longer inhabited. This city seems to breathe of its own accord, not with people, not with time, but with memory. Scholars who study urban memory call Varosha a time trap. There is no destruction here, only stillness. It neither fades nor grows, simply existing between then and now. This strange balance is the source of its appeal. Varosha is not destroyed because destruction is also movement. It remains untouched, a vestige of the human conviction that summer can last forever. After the sunny silence of Varosha, where the past has dissolved in the reflections of the sea, time seems to transport us to another element, to a place where the memory of a civilization that preceded our world lies hidden beneath layers of concrete and neon. Amidst the shining streets and high-speed trains, in the city of Sakai, near Osaka Bay, lies a silence that is more than 1,500 years old. Here, beneath residential areas and roads, sleep the burial mounds of emperors and nobles of the ancient Kofun era, stone mountains created to outlive the centuries. And they have indeed survived. Time has passed, but the hills remain, hidden beneath the asphalt like a memory that refuses to be disturbed. Today, Sakai is the heart of the metropolis, surrounded by bridges and highways. But ascend to the observation deck and a strange pattern emerges. Among the straight lines of the city blocks, enormous green ovals appear, like islands in a sea of urbanization. These are burial mounds, or kofun, funeral complexes built between the 3rd and 6th centuries AD, when Japan had no written language but already embraced power. The most famous of these is the mausoleum of Emperor Nintoku, a gigantic structure nearly half a kilometer long. Its shape resembles a keyhole, a rounded top connected to a straight protrusion, an ancient symbol of the union of heaven and earth. Archaeologists say the construction of such a burial mound required the labor of tens of thousands of people. Earth was carried in baskets, layer after layer, creating terraces on which stone statues, bronze mirrors, and clay Haniwa figurines were installed. These figurines are guardians, keepers of the boundary between the living and the dead. They stood along ditches lined with river stones, watching over the peace of their rulers. When empires disappeared, the burial mounds remained, silent, covered in grass, becoming part of the landscape. But time has not been kind to the area. With the development of cities, the ancient burial mounds became surrounded by roads, houses, and factories. Some were razed, others built over. However, the largest, including Nintoku's tomb, survived and now exist in the city center, like the green hearts of the metropolis. From above, their outlines are clearly visible, but on the ground they are simply hills with parks and ponds, where pine trees grow and cherry blossoms bloom. People stroll here, not always realizing that they are treading on the edge of an ancient world. Sakai kept its secret for a long time. It was only in the 20th century that Japanese archaeologists began systematic exploration. They discovered complex underground chambers lined with granite, tombs containing the remains of lacquered sarcophagi, and bronze swords with intricate designs. Radiocarbon dating revealed that many of these structures predate the Roman aqueducts. However, access to the interior of most of the burial mounds is closed, out of respect for the peace of the ancestors and fear of disturbing the delicate balance. In 2019, the Sakai Kofun complex was inscribed on the UNESCO World Heritage List. This recognition recognizes not only its historical value, but also its unique contrast. Ancient and modern coexist here, literally on the same level. The subway runs beneath the hills, shopping malls stand at their feet, and office windows reflect their silhouettes in the evening light. This strange juxtaposition captures the essence of the Japanese attitude toward time, not to destroy but to incorporate the past into the present. Scientists call Sakai the city beneath layers. Here, every meter of earth preserves traces of bygone eras. Under roads, pottery shards are found. Under houses, the remains of clay walls, and under parks, moats once filled with water. Archaeology here resembles a conversation rather than an excavation. Each new layer answers questions, but also poses new ones. And yet, the most important thing one senses here is the breath of time, which never dies. Standing atop the mound, you can see modern neighborhoods, roads, and power lines all around you. Everything moves, glows, and hums. But beneath your feet lies a piece that's 1,500 years old. Only a few meters of land separate these two worlds, but they're separated by entire eras. Sakai is a reminder that even in the most modern cities, ancient times live beneath layers of concrete and glass. They don't contradict progress. They make it possible, because only those who remember the past can build the future. Here, amid the lights of the metropolis, time hasn't stood still, but has become multi-layered. It flows up and down, connecting worlds, like a river reflecting the sky and the deep. While antiquity in Japan is hidden beneath layers of urban architecture, in the heart of South America, it lies open, under a rainless sky. On the Altiplano Plateau, amid the rare air and cold, where the mountains touch the clouds, lies the Puma Punku complex, a place whose name in the Aymara language means Gate of the Puma. Here, among stones weighing tens of tons, time has stood still, not because it was forgotten, but because it itself has become part of the stone. Puma Punku is part of the great center of Tiwanaku, an ancient civilization that arose long before the Incas, around the 1st millennium CE. When the Spanish conquistadors first arrived here, they saw not just ruins, but stone fragments of a world, as if carved from a design not created by man. Blocks of red sandstone and gray andesite lie here, as if they had once been dropped from a height. Some weigh up to 130 tons. But the mystery lies not in the size, but in the shape. Perfectly smooth edges, smooth corners, grooves and holes crafted with such precision that not even a knife blade can fit between them. Archaeologists claim these stones were part of a temple complex where rituals related to the sun, water, and earth took place. Puma Punku and neighboring Tiwanaku were not just settlements, but spiritual centers where engineering and faith converged. Scientists are finding traces of hydraulic systems, channels through which water flowed, creating mirror images of the temples in the heavens. Hidden beneath a layer of sand are the remains of a foundation of blocks, joined without mortar, yet so tightly that they have withstood earthquakes for millennia. The debate over how these stones were cut continues. Archaeologists have found no tools capable of cutting diorite with such precision. It is only known that the builders used copper and stone tools. Some researchers believe the secret lies not in the tools, but in the cutting technology, perhaps a combination of heat, vibration, and water. But this remains a hypothesis. The most astonishing thing is that even with modern equipment, reproducing such joints without gaps is a nearly impossible task. From above, Pumapunku appears to be a chaotic jumble of stones, but upon closer inspection, order emerges from the chaos. Every detail is meticulously crafted, like a fragment of a vast machine. Some blocks are shaped like the letter H and fit together perfectly when placed together. Scientists believe they were used to construct walls and platforms, connected into a single system. It may have been a temple of the stars, or a sanctuary oriented toward the winter solstice sunrise. Traces of cult statues and ceramic fragments depicting the Tiwanaku gods, Viracocha, creator of the world, and Pachacamac, lord of the earth, have been found in the surrounding area. It is believed that Andean cosmology, where man is inseparable from stone, water, and wind, originated here. Perhaps this is why Pumapunku is perceived not as a ruin, but as a living space where the breath of antiquity continues to flow. Over the years, the site has become the subject of scientific research, but even today, access to some parts of it is restricted, not because of danger, but because of its fragility. Stone that is thousands of years old doesn't like to be touched. It deteriorates from humidity, footsteps, and spotlights. Scientists are creating 3D models to preserve every crack, every line. Pumapunku is gradually being transferred to digital space, but its true essence remains only here, at an altitude of almost 4,000 meters, where the air rings with cold and the sun cuts through the shadows like a knife. Standing among these monoliths, it seems as if the earth is breathing. The wind passes through the holes in the stones, producing sounds like low singing. And in this singing, something human is heard. The memory of those who once built not for themselves, but for eternity. Pumapunku is not a mystery in the usual sense. It is proof that man is capable of creating beyond time. Here, stone ceases to be a material. It becomes a language, and perhaps one day we will learn to understand it again. Beyond the stone terraces of Pumapunku, where eternity takes shape, time seems to return to the sea, to a place where history is neither hidden nor destroyed, but simply stands as a witness. On the shores of the Adriatic, amid mountains and water, rises a city whose walls have survived everything: empires, wars, earthquakes. Dubrovnik is a place where time has not stood still, but has become cautious. Every stone here bears the traces of centuries, and every footstep along its streets echoes with millennia. Dubrovnik's history began in the 7th century, when refugees from the ruined Roman city of Epidaurus found refuge on a small island off the coast of Dalmatia. They built a fortress there, which eventually grew into a city. Medieval Dubrovnik, then known as Ragusa, became a trading hub between east and west. Its fleet sailed the Mediterranean, and its streets echoed with the voices of merchants from all over the world. The city flourished thanks to diplomacy, maritime expertise, and wise governance. Dubrovnik's defining characteristic has always been its independence. Even as empires crumbled around it, it maintained balance, forging alliances with those who were stronger, but never surrendering completely. Its symbol was libertas, freedom. This word is still inscribed on the stone tower that towers over the old town. The walls of Dubrovnik are not just architecture, but a chronicle. They are over 2 kilometers long and up to 6 meters thick. They are built of limestone, which has darkened over time but never weakened. Armies have repeatedly invaded these walls, the Venetians in the 14th century, later the Ottomans, and artillery in the 20th century. But the city always rose. After each blow, it rebuilt itself, stone by stone, street by street. A 17th century earthquake destroyed almost the entire city, but the inhabitants did not abandon it. They collected stones, cleared the rubble, and rebuilt houses, churches, and palaces. Even the architecture of the new Dubrovnik retained the original lines: narrow streets, arched windows, light stone reflecting the sun. This city wasn't built from scratch, it was brought back to life, like breathing. Every morning, the sun rises over the fortress towers, turning them copper-colored. Light glides across the smooth flagstones of the streets, trodden for centuries by merchants, sailors, monks, and warriors. Not a single detail is left to chance. Even the gutters, designed in the Middle Ages, still function, channeling rain from the roofs. Ancient cisterns run beneath the stones, collecting water, a system created long before the advent of modern engineering. In the Old Town Museum, you can see trade records kept without interruption since the 15th century. These books are like the pulse of time. Every page records the movements of ships, the sale of salt, wine, and silk. Dubrovnik was and remains a place where history isn't stored in museums. It walks the streets with the people. During the last war of the 20th century, the city again came under fire. Hundreds of shells rained down on the walls. Fires destroyed roofs, but even then, the inhabitants did not abandon it. When the fighting ended, the most careful reconstruction in European history began. Stones were sorted by color and age to return them to their proper place. Each section of the wall was inspected by craftsmen, many of whom were descendants of those who rebuilt the city after the earthquake 400 years earlier. Today, Dubrovnik is more than just a resort. It lives like ancient cities, unhurriedly, with dignity. Its streets are filled with music and voices, but beneath all this noise, one can still sense a profound silence, the kind that emerges when a place outlives its inhabitants. There's no need to look for a museum here. The entire city is a museum, only a living one. Scholars call Dubrovnik the archaeology of survival. It hasn't fallen into the past or become a ruin. It has managed to unite the centuries while preserving itself. Every tower, every door, every tile in the square, it's part of a single body in which time still flows. You can't stop it, but you can slow it down. You can learn to listen to its sounds in stone. When evening falls over the Adriatic, the walls are painted orange, and the city seems young again. Waves crash against the foot of the fortress. Seagulls circle above the towers, and in this rhythm, something unchanging is felt. In Dubrovnik, time doesn't pass. It simply breathes, slowly, calmly, like the sea. Beyond the mighty walls of Dubrovnik, where stone speaks the language of centuries, the story shifts to the gentle hills of southern Italy, where houses resemble shells emerging from the earth. Alberobello is a village where architecture has become a form of memory. Here, time hasn't stopped violently as after wars or disasters. It has simply slowed, transformed into white limestone and rounded roofs built without a single piece of cement. This place seems carved out of a dream, yet it is utterly real. Alberobello is located in the Apulia region, nestled between valleys of vineyards and olive groves. Its appearance is unique. Hundreds of small houses with conical roofs, called trulli, form a whimsical labyrinth of narrow streets. Each trullo is built from local limestone, laid by hand without mortar, only with precise calculations of weight and shape. The domes are crowned with stone spires and ancient symbols. The sun, crosses, and signs dating back to pre-Christian times are often visible on the walls. The history of this unusual settlement dates back to the 17th century, when the region belonged to Count Acquaviva. To avoid taxes levied on every permanent structure, peasants began constructing houses without cement, so they could be quickly dismantled and reassembled if needed. Thus arose an entire architectural culture, truly a symbol of the ingenuous wisdom and resilience of the common people. Over time, this form of construction acquired aesthetic significance. The houses became not only a shelter, but also an expression of harmony with nature. The stones used to build the walls were quarried nearby. The earth itself provided the material. Thanks to the thick walls and domed shape, the interiors always remained cool in the summer and warm in the winter. Even without modern technology, residents were able to create an ideal microclimate based on observation and intuition. Archaeologists and architects call Alberobello a living monument to instinctive construction. Not a single house here was built according to blueprints. Everything was calculated by eye, with generation after generation, passing down the skill of laying the stones. The oldest artisans, known in the village as maschiari, still teach the younger generations, explaining how to lay the top stone, the pinnacle, the symbol of a completed house. Each artisan has their own style, and so no two truly are alike, even when they stand side by side. When viewed from above, Alberobello resembles a swarm of white shells scattered across the green hills. During the day, the sun makes the walls dazzlingly bright. At night, the moon tints the stone silver. There's no pretentiousness or opulence here, but there's something missing from modern cities, a sense of peace. In these houses, time seems to stand still, not with a deadly cold, but with a soft silence. While walking the streets of Alberobello, you'll notice that the houses are built very close to each other, forming a seamless fabric. This is no coincidence. In the old days, neighbors' walls literally supported each other, preventing buildings from collapsing during earthquakes. This reflects the villagers' philosophy of interdependence. No one existed separately. A house was part of another house, and a person was part of the community. Today, Alberobello is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, but life here hasn't turned into a museum. People still live in Trulli, cook on stone slabs, and dry laundry in the narrow streets, just as they did 300 years ago. Tourists come to see the fairy tale village, but for locals, it's simply home, familiar, and timeless. Locals say the Trulli possess unique acoustics. Any word spoken inside seems to echo in a whisper. This whisper isn't an echo, but, as the elders say, the breath of the stone. Perhaps this is the magic of Alberobello. The houses here aren't silent. They breathe with the people. When the sun sets behind the hills, the light fades from the small windows, and the village seems to fall asleep, like a living being. The wind passes between the roofs, fluttering the flags on the spires, and everything around is immersed in that very silence in which time no longer counts the days. Alberobello is more than just an ancient settlement. It's a reminder that resilience and beauty are born of simplicity, that a home can be part of the landscape, and a person, an extension of the earth. Nothing here is accidental, for everything was created by hands that knew moderation and peace. And perhaps that's precisely why time has chosen to remain here, not as a memory, but as a life. While on the other side of the world, antiquity rests in stone and dust. In Mongolia, it lives in motion, in the wind that carries across the steppe, the scent of grass, the murmur of rivers, and the voices of bygone empires. Here, in the Orkhon Valley, time has not stood still, but stretched, dissolving between the hills and the sky. Thousands of years of history lie not in the earth, but on its surface, in burial mounds, stone sculptures, and runic inscriptions facing the sun. This place is not just an archaeological site, but a vast human footprint left in the heart of Asia. The Orkhon Valley stretches along the Orkhon River in central Mongolia, between the Khangai Mountains. From above, it appears as a vast bowl where steppes, hills, and rocky ridges converge. Here, amidst this vast expanse, the winds flowing toward China and Siberia are born. And it is here, according to archaeologists, that the history of the peoples of the Great Steppe began. Long before Genghis Khan, this valley was home to nomadic tribes who were the first to combine art, faith, and power. The valley preserves traces of dozens of eras. The most ancient monuments date back to the Bronze Age, stone sculptures carved with figures of deer, the sun, and stylized humans. These deer stones stand in rows facing east, as if still greeting the dawn. They reach 3 meters in height, and their surfaces reveal engravings, spirals, bows, daggers, and wings. Scientists believe these are symbols of the transition from life to death, a kind of gatekeeper between worlds. Beneath each stone, archaeologists find burial mounds, burials of nobles or warriors, filled with bronze jewelry, horse remains, tools, and amulets. Over the centuries, the Orkhon Valley became the cradle of empires. Here, in the 8th century AD, the capital of the Uyghur Khaganate, Ordu Balik, the city of kings, was built. All that remains are the foundations of walls, traces of towers, and the remains of stone palaces. Later, in the 13th century, slightly north, on this same site, Karakorum emerged, the capital of Genghis Khan's Mongol Empire. Archaeologists find ceramics, weapons, seals, and coins from China and Persia, along with traces of workshops where blacksmiths and jewelers from dozens of nations worked. But the grandeur of these empires is only the surface. Beneath it lie others, millennia old, upon which all subsequent kingdoms were built. Every hill in this valley is part of a burial mound field. Some are small, others reach 30 meters in diameter and several meters in height. Their structure is strikingly precise, rings of stone, mounds, even rows of slabs. Such mounds are found not only on plains but also in mountain passes, where the wind never ceases. And it seems as if this wind is the very breath of those who rest here. Archaeologists call the Orkhon Valley an open book of steppe history. Here, one can trace the succession of cultures, from the Bronze Age to medieval empires. Each layer of earth preserves traces of a different people. In one place, Scythian-style arrowheads are found, in another, Buddhist figurines, and in a third, runic inscriptions in the Old Turkic language. One of the steles bears inscriptions addressed to the gods of heaven and earth. Their meaning is simple and eternal. Man departs, but the wind remains. Today, the Orkhon Valley is listed as a UNESCO World Heritage Site. But unlike most archaeological reserves, there are no fences, ticket offices, or pavilions. Everything is open air. Shepherds graze their cattle among ancient burial sites. Children play at the foot of the mounds, and archaeologists excavate next to yurts. This is a rare place where history and life do not oppose each other, but coexist. Scientists from Mongolia, Russia, Japan, and Germany have been exploring the valley for decades. Using satellite imagery and drones, they are mapping mound fields and analyzing the structure of burial grounds and ancient settlements. Some mounds have proven more complex than previously thought. Inside are stone chambers with false vaults, the remains of wooden structures, and evidence of horse sacrifices. All of this testifies to a high level of social organization long before the advent of writing. But despite the scientific interest, the main attraction in the Orkhon Valley is not archaeology, but a sense of space. Here, it is impossible to separate nature from history. The evening light falls on the hills so that they seem like living beings sleeping in the steppe. When the sun sets, the stone steles cast long shadows, and the wind passing between them creates a low hum, like a chant. Locals believe this is the singing of ancestral spirits, and they do not argue with the wind. The Orkhon Valley is the heart of Mongolia, where the past is not destroyed, but dissolved into the air. There's no need to look for ruins here, they're everywhere. There's no need to dig the earth here, it speaks for itself, if you listen. And when you stand among the mounds, where the grass sways and the sky seems endless, you understand that time truly can stand still. Not in stone or in oblivion, but in the breath of the wind that carries across the steppe the whispers of all those who once called this land home. When the wind of the Orkhon Valley whispers of eternity, on the other side of the world, time vanishes not in sand, but in water. On the coast of Suffolk, where the gray North Sea laps against chalk cliffs, the town of Dunwich once stood. Today, it's almost gone. Only scraps of walls, fragments of cemeteries, and scattered foundations framed by thickets and a cold wind. But in the Middle Ages, Dunwich was a great port, the capital of East Anglia, bustling with life, the ringing of 12 church bells, and the bustle of markets. Now, beneath a thick layer of salt water, lie its streets, its piers, its memory. All that remains is the shore, slowly crumbling into the sea. Dunwich's history began in the 7th century AD. Back then, it was the capital of the Anglo-Saxon kingdom of East Anglia and one of Britain's largest ports. Ships from Scandinavia and Flanders came here, trading wool, salt, and fish. The town boasted monasteries, stone churches, and walls protecting the harbor from the winds. But even the chronicles of that time contain alarming lines. The sea was approaching. Every storm claimed a piece of land, sweeping away houses and streets, and no one could stop the elements. Thus, the first major destruction occurred in the 12th century, when a series of storms changed the course of the River Blyth. The harbor, the lifeblood of the town, began to silt up, while the sea, conversely, deepened the shore. A storm in 1218 destroyed half of Dunwich. People hauled away bells and salvaged relics, but with each winter, they returned to a smaller town. By the 13th century, 7 of the 12 churches remained. By the 15th, 2. By the 18th century, water had swallowed everything. Today, archaeologists estimate almost 90% of the ancient town lies beneath the sea. The sea at Dunwich isn't stormy. Its strength lies in its constancy. Winds blowing off the North Sea create a slow but inexorable erosion. Slopes crumble, earth slides down, houses collapse into the water. Every year, the sea reclaims another meter of shoreline. Scientists call this process silent erosion, but there's something solemn about it, as if nature itself is finishing what man began. Archaeologists long believed Dunwich had vanished without a trace, but in the early 21st century, a team of researchers from the University of Southampton conducted underwater scanning of the coastal seabed. LiDAR images revealed the outlines of streets, foundations, and even the remains of churches. Among them was the enormous St. Nicholas Tower, which once stood in the town center. Now it lies underwater, covered in silt and shells. Stone blocks that once saw sunlight now rest in the shade of seaweed. This is Britain's first underwater ghost settlement, reconstructed using digital models. Locals often say the sea sounds different near Dunwich. On calm days, when the wind dies down, a low hum can be heard underwater, like distant bells. Scientists attribute this to wave acoustics in the terrain, but for those who live nearby, it's a reminder of a town that no longer exists. All that remains on the coast is St. James's Church, built after the disaster. Its cemetery stands on the edge of a cliff. With each passing decade, the wind pushes it closer, and the graves lined with grass slowly crumble into the sea.
Today, Dunwich is a small village of about 100 residents. It houses a museum housing fragments of stone inscriptions, maps, drawings, and rare mosaic fragments recovered from the seabed. Scientists and tourists come here to see a place where history and nature have become one. But unlike ruins, Dunwich doesn't stand on land. It lives underwater. It's marked on the map, but if you step ashore, all you can see is the horizon. This town has become a symbol not only of destruction, but also of an eternal presence. In England, they say, Dunwich didn't disappear, it simply became part of the sea. And there's truth to this. Every storm that batters the cliffs, every wave crashing against the rocks, carries with it fragments of the ancient town, sweeping them into the depths. The water has become its extension, a new body. For historians, Dunwich is a laboratory of time. Here you can watch nature slowly rewrite history, transforming the past into geology. In other places, archaeologists excavate the earth. Here, they read the sea. It preserves the city within, but refuses to let it be reclaimed. When you stand on the cliff by the old cemetery, you see more than just the landscape. Below, beneath the waves, life continues in another world. Fish swim between the columns, seaweed sways where altars once stood. And above, the wind carries the scent of salt and dry grass, and everything seems unchanged. Dunwich is more than just ruins, but a slowly disappearing boundary between man and nature. It reminds us that no creation lasts forever, and even stone can become water. But perhaps this is how memory is preserved, not in walls, not in maps, but in what continues to exist, changing form. The sea did not destroy Dunwich, it embraced it, as history embraces everything that was once alive. And now, as the waves wash over the empty shore, it seems not the end, but the endless breath of time. After all, the city that disappeared beneath the water did not die. It simply chose a different way to remain. After the steep coastlines of England, where time melts into the sea, we are transported to the endless plains of northern Iraq, where a hot wind carries sand from the Syrian deserts. It is there that the ruins of Hatra rise, an ancient city whose silence speaks louder than any tale. Here, under a sun that never sets, time seems to stand still. Hatra was once one of the most powerful cities in the East, a center of trade, religion, and military might. Today only walls and columns remain, and even they bear the breath of millennia. The city arose over 2,000 years ago, during the era when the world was divided between Rome and Parthia. At the crossroads of caravan routes leading from Mesopotamia to Syria and Persia, Hatra quickly became a wealthy oasis. Merchants brought gold, spices, incense, jade, and rare fabrics here. But hidden behind the shopping arcades was a fortress, a city surrounded by a mighty wall with round towers and gates capable of withstanding any siege. Archaeologists would later calculate that Hatra's walls stretched for 2 kilometers and were so strong that even the Roman legions could not breach them. During the reign of Emperor Trajan, the Roman army attempted to conquer the city, but encountered an invisible force, unity, faith, and walls built with mathematical precision. Decades later, the Romans returned again, under the command of Septimius Severus. They besieged Hatra for weeks, but were unable to break through. Chronicles of the time wrote that the city's defenders warred with the spirits of the wind. Perhaps this was simply a metaphor, but within it lay the truth. Hatra stood at the crossroads of civilizations, absorbing their gods and traditions, and became something more than just a city. Its temples, discovered by archaeologists in the 20th century, are striking in their scale and style. The reliefs juxtapose Mesopotamian symbols and Greek ornaments, and the goddesses' faces are rendered in an almost Roman style. In one hall,
Statues with eyes inlaid with marble and obsidian were discovered. They stare at the intruder as if time had simply feigned death. Each column here is like the breath of an era that has not vanished, but rather stands still, waiting to be called by its name again. When Parthia fell and Persia arose in its place, Hatra still stood, but nothing lasts forever, and in the 3rd century AD, the city fell under the onslaught of Shah Shapur. Sand slowly began its conquest. Trade routes shifted, wells dried up, and the city, once a shining force, sank into oblivion. Over the centuries, its name almost disappeared from the chronicles. Only the wind continued to circle its walls, like a guard never leaving his post. In the 20th century, archaeologists rediscovered Hatra. They cleared the temples, domes, and vaults, and raised sculptures from the sand that had lain motionless for over 1,500 years. The city came to life, but not for long. In the 21st century, war came. Fighting and barbaric destruction once again turned Hatra into a field of ruins. It seemed as if history were repeating itself, like a mirage. But even then, the ancient stone did not give in. Many temples survived, and the statues chopped off and charred retained an expression of eternal tranquility. Today, Hatra is listed as a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Scientists carefully restore its fragments. Archaeologists record every detail, as if afraid to disturb the breath of the past. When the sun sets, the ruins take on a coppery glow, making it seem as if the city is alive. It has simply chosen silence over time. Hatra is a reminder that cities, like people, die not when their walls collapse, but when they are forgotten. But Hatra is impossible to forget. It stands like a stone mirage amid the sands, preserving the memory of all who once believed they could stop time. And beyond its horizon, where the dunes give way to dry plains, lies another place. A city where time stands still differently. There, it wasn't destroyed by war or covered in sand. It simply departed, leaving streets where only the wind now blows. After silent cities where the past stands frozen in the sun, the path heads south, to where the land itself preserves the memory of eras. On the edge of Argentine Patagonia, in the province of Mendoza, lies one of South America's most astonishing natural mysteries, Caverna de las Brujas, the Cave of Witches. Its winding passages stretch deep beneath Mount Monojito, and every meter here is a record of millions of years of geological history. From the outside, the cave entrance is barely visible. A narrow fissure gapes among the gray limestone cliffs, letting out a cool breeze and the gentle drip of water. Tourists entering for the first time often stop in amazement. Beyond the narrow corridor lies a chamber as tall as a 5-story building, adorned with stone vaults, stalactites, and stalagmites. Their shapes resemble candles, columns, and even human figures, hence the place's mystical name. The cave formed during the Jurassic period, when most of what is now Argentina was covered by a shallow sea. Then, 150 million years ago, limestone layers began to slowly dissolve in water, creating underground voids. Over millions of years, driven by underground rivers and dripping water, mineral formations grew within them, from thin needles to heavy domes glistening with moisture. Geologists call these formations living, as they continue to grow to this day, just a few millimeters per century. But it wasn't only nature that left its mark here. Archaeologists found traces of fires and tool fragments at the cave entrance, evidence that ancient people knew about this place thousands of years ago. They may have used it as a shelter or a sanctuary. For the ancient inhabitants of Patagonia, darkness always symbolized the transition between worlds. Indigenous tribes' legends said that water spirits lived beneath the mountains, guarding the passage to the heart of the earth. Spanish colonists, hearing these stories, dubbed the place the Witch's Cave, and the name stuck forever. Exploration of the cave began in the 20th century. In 1940, geologist Alberto Recalde first mapped its chambers, noting areas he couldn't reach due to narrow passages. Later, in the 1970s, speleologists arrived and discovered that the system extends over 5 kilometers. Most of the passages remain difficult to access. The temperature inside remains around 10 degrees Celsius, and the humidity is nearly 100%. Any careless movement could damage the fragile formations that took millions of years to form. The cave's most famous room is the Salón de las Columnas, the Hall of Columns. Its ceiling recedes into darkness, and stone pillars formed by the merging of stalactites and stalagmites resemble the nave of a Roman temple. The light from a lantern reflects off the damp surfaces, turning the walls gold and silver. No artist created this. Only water and time. Here, one feels especially keenly that before one is not just a landscape, but a process that continues to this day. Scientists from the National University of Cuyo are conducting microfauna studies in the cave. Colonies of rare insects and bacteria thrive in complete darkness, surviving without sunlight, using mineral compounds for energy. These organisms help us understand how life might have originated on Earth and where it might exist under similar conditions. For example, beneath the surface of Mars or Jupiter's icy moons. To preserve the unique microclimate, most of the cave is closed to visitors. Only the first kilometer of the route, equipped with lights and handrails, is open. Guides warn against touching the walls, as a fingerprint could stop the growth of mineral crystals. Every year, hundreds of people come here to see what time actually looks like. Many say it feels like being in the heart of the planet. You can hear the dripping of water, as if the Earth itself were measuring the seconds. Locals carefully preserve legends about the Witch's Cave. They say that on the darkest night of the year, quiet voices, like the whisper of the wind, can be heard inside. Scientists explain this by acoustics. The sounds of raindrops bouncing off the walls create vibrations reminiscent of words. But even knowing the explanation, it's hard not to feel that this place has a special life of its own. Today, Caverna de las Brujas is a national nature reserve. It is protected by the state, and any interference is strictly prohibited. It attracts not only tourists but also researchers seeking to understand how harmony is born from chaos and darkness. The cave has become a symbol of nature's slowness, a reminder that the most majestic forms are created not in years, but over eternity. When you emerge, the sunlight stings your eyes, and the wind feels almost hot after the subterranean cold. But the hum of the cave lingers in your memory, the same hum that hasn't ceased for millions of years. It sounds like the breath of the planet, like the music of stones, playing beyond time. After the underground labyrinths of Patagonia, where time was preserved in stone, the journey continues even further, to the very edge of human presence, where even the air seems alien. Antarctica is the only continent with no states or permanent inhabitants, only snow, ice, and stations built by people attempting to measure eternity. Among hundreds of such bases, there is one that is rarely discussed. The station, known unofficially as Time Loop, stands at the edge of the Earth, where all clocks stopped on the same day and never moved again. Its history begins in the mid-20th century, during the first international expeditions. Back then, Antarctica was the scene of not only scientific, but also political rivalry. Several countries established bases along the coast, seeking to gain a foothold in the icy wilderness. One of them, built on an unnamed cape in East Antarctica, was intended to be a temporary base for geophysical observations. The station was named simply for its coordinates. Documents listed it as temporary, but it remained inhabited for nearly 20 years. Its wooden hulls, covered in layers of snow, gradually became part of the landscape. In winter, temperatures dropped below 70 degrees Celsius. Blizzards lasted for weeks, and the crew lived as if in another world. They measured the magnetic field, recorded ice movements, and sampled the atmosphere, all in complete isolation. Sometimes supply ships were unable to break through the ice for months, and then the station became a tiny, self-contained universe. But in the late 1970s, after yet another winter, contact with the station was lost. Not a single ship had been able to reach it. The ice had shifted, altering the coastline. When a new expedition arrived years later, the buildings were half buried under snow. Inside were instruments, notebooks, dishes, even clothing, as if the people had simply left and never returned. The calendar in the mess hall bore a date detached from time, July 6th. Not a trace of the people was found. The archives preserved little information. The station was officially declared abandoned, but its history intrigued scientists, not because of its disappearance, but because of its preservation. The frozen air preserved everything: paper, food, even smells. Scientists who examined the site said it was as if time had not passed at all. Maps remained on the walls, pencils were still wet, and clocks that had fallen to the floor still showed the same time as decades ago. Researchers call such objects climate capsules. Thanks to the complete absence of microbes and the low temperature, objects do not decompose but live in their own time. Every object inside the station is a document of an era, unwritten but preserved. Among the finds are old tapes recording wind, the sounds of snowstorms, and even fragments of radio transmissions. In one of them, you can hear an operator reading weather data, followed by a crackling sound and silence. This moment marked the boundary between the past and the present. It was later discovered that part of the station had fallen into a crevasse beneath a layer of snow. Perhaps the people simply didn't have time to escape, but over time, an almost mystical aura grew around the site. Tourists and researchers arriving in Antarctica sometimes report that their instruments begin to behave strangely near the station's coordinates. Compasses spin, watches lose several minutes of their time. Scientists attribute this to magnetic anomalies, but the symbolism proved too strong, and the station was nicknamed Time Loop. It's now officially closed. No routes pass through here, and no expedition is allowed to stop within a few kilometers for safety. But satellite images show the buildings still standing. Their roofs have collapsed, their doors are covered in snow, but their outlines are discernible, dark rectangles amid the white ice. Human footprints left in a place where time has no hold. Antarctica is the only continent where the past and present exist side by side. Air bubbles trapped tens of thousands of years ago are preserved beneath layers of ice several kilometers thick. Scientists drill ice cores to decipher the history of the climate from the chemical composition of the air. Every centimeter of ice represents a year, every crack an era. Here, time doesn't move forward. It accumulates like snow, layer upon layer. The time loop station became a symbol of this slow eternity. People tried to measure it with instruments, but ended up becoming part of what was being measured. Their instruments became artifacts, and their presence became a legend. There's a strange justice to this. Everything man builds eventually becomes nature. When summer expeditions fly over this stretch of coastline, a trace is visible among the silent ice, a dark dot on the endless white. It's not a ruin, not a monument, but rather a reminder. In a world where everything moves faster than ever, there's a place where time stands still, not by human will, but by the law of the cold. And perhaps it's in this silence that the answer lies. Time doesn't disappear, it simply waits for someone to try to measure it again. After icy Antarctica, where time stands still, history shifts to a place where sun and sand have become guardians of the past. In the heart of North Africa, on the slopes of the Ore Plateau, lies a place where ancient Rome seems not to have died, but to have fallen asleep. Timgad, a city built for legionaries nearly 2,000 years ago, today looks as if it were abandoned yesterday. No other Roman city has been so completely preserved. Streets, forums, theaters, temples, everything is still there. Only instead of crowds and laughter, the wind now blows. Timgad was founded in the 1st century AD by order of Emperor Trajan. The city was intended for veterans of the 3rd Augustan Legion who had served in the North African campaigns. A plot of land and a house in the new colony was their reward for their service. But Trajan envisioned more than just a settlement, but an ideal Roman city, a symbol of order and civilization in a land dominated by the desert. Timgad's layout reflects military logic. The two main streets, the Cardo and the Decumanus, intersect at right angles, dividing the city into precise squares. This principle would later become the basis for European cities, but here it took shape for the first time. Archaeologists note the remarkable symmetry, exactly 600 meters from gate to gate, and 100 steps from the square to the amphitheater. Even the wells and baths are arranged along precise axes, as in the blueprint. The city was built from sandstone quarried nearby, and to this day it seems as if the stone retains the warmth of the builder's hands. Historians estimate that approximately 15,000 people lived here: artisans, soldiers, priests, merchants, and children. The streets were paved with flagstones, and even today one can walk along them, hearing one's own echo, as if one's footsteps were echoing those of others. In the center of the city stands the Forum, the heart of Roman life. Statues of the emperors stood here, and trade, judgment, and celebrations took place. Inscriptions on the walls read, Timgad, a gift from Trajan to the veterans who defeated the barbarians. A little further on stands the library, one of the few in Africa from the imperial era. Its ruins still command respect. Scroll shelves, stone benches, a circular reading room where light fell from above like a ray of truth. But the theater makes a particularly impressive impression. The semicircle, which could accommodate 3,000 spectators, opens to the mountains, and when the wind blows through the empty rows, it seems as if time is applauding. The stage retains its ornamentation, columns, and fragments of bas-reliefs. The breath of ancient art can still be felt here. Scientists have discovered that on the summer solstice, the first rays of the sun illuminate the stage precisely in the center. This was no coincidence, but part of a ritual. The city flourished for nearly 3 centuries. Coins were minted here, fountains, temples, and forums were built. But nothing lasts forever. In the 5th century, the Vandals arrived, then the Byzantines, and later the Arabs. Each left its mark, but Timgad endured until the Sahara sands began to encroach. Slowly at first, then inexorably. People abandoned their homes, saving their belongings, and the wind swept the streets. By the 8th century, the city had vanished beneath the desert, becoming a mirage. For centuries, it was forgotten. Only at the end of the 19th century did French archaeologists exploring Algeria stumble upon stone arches protruding from the sand. Excavations lasted for decades. Layer after layer, the city emerged into the light, as if awakening. When Trajan's Arch of Triumph emerged from the sand, the whole world learned of the African Pompeii. But unlike Pompeii, destroyed by catastrophe, Timgad simply fell asleep, and thus remained preserved as if time had passed it by. Today, the ruins of Timgad are striking in their integrity. From above, you can discern the city's layout. The streets intersect like lines in a palm. The amphitheater and temples stand out like hearts and patterns. The sun, passing over them, slowly changes the color of the stone from ochre to gold, and it seems as if the city is alive with the breath of day. Tourists walk the same roads as Roman legionnaires, and if you close your eyes, you can hear the bustle of the market, the smell of oil and wine, the cries of merchants, the laughter of children. None of this has disappeared. It has simply vanished into thin air. Archaeologists continue to uncover astonishing details. One house contains a mosaic depicting a mermaid, another an inscription in Latin, Vive memor leti, leave remembering death. These words encapsulate the philosophy of Timgad. The people who lived here understood the fragility of their world, yet they continued to build, celebrate, and laugh. Perhaps that's why their city has endured for centuries. Today, Timgad is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Sands no longer threaten it. Barriers have been erected to halt the movement of the dunes. But the wind still wafts through the streets like an ancient spirit, checking to see that everything is in place. When the sun sets behind the Aures Ridge, the shadows of the arches fall across the ruins, and the city seems to come alive for a moment. In this silence, one senses the presence of time, not as a destroyer, but as a preserver. Timgad is more than just an archaeological site. It's a reminder that even the grandeur of an empire can become a dream, but a beautiful one. It contains something indestructible, the human desire for order, for beauty, for eternity. And while the sand whispers between the stones, this city continues to exist in its own time, calm, golden, and endless. After the sandy ruins of Timgad, where antiquity rests in the silence of the desert, the narrative shifts to the sea, to a place where time hasn't stood still, but has begun to flow in a unique way. On the coast of central Vietnam, between green hills and the azure waves of the South China Sea, lies the city of Hoi An, a living museum where past and present merge into a single breath. Here, history doesn't end. It continues every day, in the lanterns reflecting in the Thu Ban River, in the scent of rice and incense, in the narrow alleys where the sound of footsteps echoes through the centuries. Hoi An is one of the few cities in Asia whose appearance has remained virtually unchanged since the Middle Ages. Its streets, houses, temples, and shops remain as they were seen by merchants of the 16th and 17th centuries, when the city was the largest port in the Far East. Ships from China, Japan, India, Arabia, and Europe flocked here. Dozens of languages were spoken along the waterfront, and silk, spices, ceramics, and precious stones were traded. The city was known as Faifo, the gateway to Indochina. Archaeological excavations showed that a settlement existed here long before trade flourished. As early as the 2nd century BC, the Sa Huing culture flourished on these shores, leaving behind clay urns, bronze mirrors, and jade jewelry. Later, the area became part of the Champa Kingdom and then became part of Vietnam. Each layer of history left its mark, creating a fascinating fusion of cultures in architecture, ornamentation, even food. When Europe discovered Asia, Hoi An became a meeting point between two worlds. The Portuguese and Dutch built trading posts here, and Japanese merchants erected their famous covered bridge, the symbol of the city. Its wooden beams, connecting two quarters, rest on stone pillars, and, according to legend, the bridge was meant to tame the dragon living underground and causing earthquakes. A small temple dedicated to guardian spirits stands at the top of the bridge. By the mid-17th century, Hoi An had reached the height of its power. Warehouses filled with tea, porcelain, and spices lined the narrow streets. Incense burned in the temples, and anchor chains clanked in the port. But over time, the river began to dry up, the channel shifted, and ships began to bypass the city. Trade shifted to Da Nang, and Hoi An gradually sank into oblivion. However, it was precisely this oblivion that saved it. Neither wars nor industrialization destroyed the ancient quarters. Everything remained as it was. Today, entering the old town feels like stepping into the past. Houses with carved wooden shutters, courtyards, and moss-covered tiled roofs. Everything looks untouched. In the evenings, the city is illuminated by thousands of paper lanterns. They reflect in the water, turning the river into a golden ribbon. The market sells spices, tea, sea salt, and good luck charms. The air smells of rain and lotus flowers. Scholars note that Hoi An is a rare example of a city where not only its architecture, but also its rhythm of life has been preserved. Craft workshops where silk fabrics are handcrafted, forges where bronze figurines are forged, and wood carving workshops still exist. Even the boats on the river are built using ancient designs passed down from generation to generation. This is not a reconstruction. It is life continuing unhurriedly. In recent years, archaeologists from the University of Hanoi have conducted extensive research into old houses. In the basements, they found Chinese and Japanese ceramics, Arabic coins, and Portuguese crosses. All this confirms that Hoi An was more than just a trading post, but a cultural hub where East and West first met on equal terms. What would later be called the global world was formed here. Tourists sometimes say that the clocks in Hoi An don't work, and indeed, it's difficult to sense the passage of time here. Day slowly dissolves into the evening glow of lanterns, and night gives way to dawn, leaving no trace. Locals say the city breathes in its own way. This breathing conveys a special harmony, a balance between past and present, between people and space. But Hoi An holds not only beauty, but also a warning. Sea levels are rising, and every year the waters creep closer to the waterfront. Archaeologists and ecologists are creating digital replicas of the city to preserve it in the event of a catastrophe. However, the residents themselves are in no hurry to leave. They believe it is their duty to preserve its memory. After all, as long as they live, the past will not disappear. When the sun sets over the river and lanterns flicker in the windows, the city fills with light, soft, warm, like the breath of centuries. Here, time doesn't stand still, but flows differently, like a slow stream in which the past is always close. This is the secret of Hoi An. It is unafraid of change because it has become the embodiment of that which never changes, the human capacity to remember. Hoi An is the final touch in a gallery of places where time has stood still. But perhaps it isn't here that time has stood still at all. It has simply learned to live in harmony with eternity.